you help me with
Awesome.
that?
We'll let you get started.
All right, cool. So, yep. So, yeah, greenfield for Green Analyst. My first 90 days in cyber. Now, how do I move forwards? I can do that. So we do that. Beautiful. That's how that works. All right. So a bit about me. I grew up in a small country town. We didn't have a huge amount. We weren't uncomfortable with what we had. We lived comfortably, but we never really had a lot of luxuries. We couldn't just duck down to the shop and grab something. If something broke, we'd have to fix it. So we ended up doing a lot of repairs and stuff like that. For example, when I was 12, my sister's laptop wasn't working, and it was her only laptop for uni. So I took what I found was that the main board and the daughter board for power, the connections together wouldn't work. Um, so online, people were saying to use just to resolder the connectors. I'm 12 years old. I didn't have a soldering iron, let alone know how to use it. So what I found was I got a bobby pin, some 2mm um, hose from the garden, and screwed it down over the connector to fix it. So that kind of MacGyvering has given me a unique perspective that I've tried to bring forwards into a lot of what I do. Basically, just taking what you've got and using it in what you do every day. So that helped to build a lot of who I am and what's behind me there. So challenge of entering cybersecurity. So I went through my life working a lot of interesting jobs, being a private investigator, electronics repairs for Samsung, lots of different things that were quite fun. When I got to the age of 30, I'd realized that I hadn't really ever had a career. I'd worked lots of jobs, been in jobs for periods of time, but never anything that I could really say was a career. So when I just finished a job, I'd taken a month off between finishing my last job and starting my new one. I went up to visit a friend. She'd been trying to convince me for a long time to get into cybersecurity. She'd been in the industry for a long time, but I'd never really taken much to it. I'd always been burning myself out and just focusing on what I was doing right there and then without ever looking at what was around. So when I was leaving, I'd been up with her for a few weeks and she'd been talking a lot about cyber and all the cool stuff to do with it, and saying how hard it was to find people to actually employ in the roles. So when I was on the way heading back from Brisbane to Melbourne, I jumped in my car about to drive back and she put a podcast on for me, which was Darknet Diaries. And the whole trip just straight by myself listening to that podcast. By the time I got back, I pulled up in the driveway at home and I messaged her back and I said, "You're right. This is what I need to do. This is everything I need in my life, and it's what I really need to do." So from there, um, I listened to a lot of podcasts, went through one podcast to another to try and learn as much as I could about the different areas. I had a Try Hack Me account before, reactivated that to try and learn a bit more about the different areas and what I could do. And yeah, just basically trying to familiarize myself as much as I can. But with my experience, it was a bit of, I guess, some of my own doing with the way I was trying to enter it. But it took me 2 years to actually find a job. In fact, it actually took me 2 years to get an interview or any feedback from any employer. And what I'm hoping to do is to get a few points to anybody who's just starting to get out into the industry that might be having some trouble getting in to give them some tips that might help. Again, this is what worked for me. It's not going to work for everybody because everybody's different. You're going to do things different ways. A lot of people gave me really good advice, which would have gotten me in a lot quicker. But it's just not how my brain works, so it didn't work for me. So again, you might not take anything out of it, but hopefully it'll help somebody to get a job. All right, so there's some really good advice that I got, which would have helped me if I had listened to it a lot more. Basically, cyber's a big area, and there's lots of different niches. Obviously, you've got going down red teaming and penetration testing. You've got GRC. You've got SOC analyst or incident response and data forensics. And a lot of the roles that you're going to be going out there are probably going to be looking at a more targeted role. So you're going to be looking at jobs that are for a SOC analyst or for somebody in GRC and that. And especially in the entry level, if you're going in there and they ask you, or if you're not sounding confident that that's what you want to do, you're not really going to get very far. So if they're putting things in the job description or asking you questions around why you want to do that in particular, and you're giving them kind of not very accurate answers to why you want to do exactly that, people are probably going to look past you and look for somebody who knows that's what they want to do. And I know that's probably one of the reasons that it took me so long as well. I'm very general in what I do and the approach that I take to things. I like doing a bit of everything. So I know that even speaking to a few people that were talking about referring me through to different places, I think that when they could see that I wasn't exactly sure of what I wanted to do, it kind of put them off that a bit. So that's some advice that really would have probably helped me. Utilizing networks is a huge thing as well. So when I'd gotten back from Brisbane, I started looking through InfoSec Twitter when it was still not so much of a toxic place that it may or may not have become at some point. So I started following a lot of people that I see around in this kind of community as well here that really helped to influence me in what I was looking for and my hunting. From there as well, I'd found out about B-Sides Melbourne, which for me was a really big part of what steered my search as well. I went to B-Sides Melbourne 2 years ago. I was lucky enough to get a ticket to the actual conference, and I went to a very, very fulfilling data forensics training session as well that was hosted by a very experienced teacher, which helped me to understand a lot more as well. So from there, I really got to know a lot more about the community and started to grow my network. And that introduced me to more networks as well. So everybody that I've met in those networks and every piece of advice I've gotten out of the kind of almost 3 years that I've been going through in this community now, I've probably only had 3 bits of advice that I found weren't really good. And those were still good to help me to learn about people and different things, but it wasn't very valuable in what I was doing, but it helped me to learn more about how people think. So the advice that these people in these communities are going to give you are generally going to be pretty good. Whether or not it applies to you, still try and assess it to see what will really work with you. Because yeah, the advice from these communities, especially in this area around here, are just fantastic. One of the things that really helped me more than anything to get my job eventually, which I'll go into a bit more, is expand your search area as well. So if you have the ability to travel further, Melbourne or major cities, so for me it was particularly Melbourne, but major cities tend to have a lot of people trying to apply for a lot of jobs. When you move out of there, you'll get a lot less competition as well. So I'm lucky enough that I live outside of Melbourne. So I'm about an hour to an hour and 20 minutes into the city. I'm about the same to a lot of the bigger regional centres in Victoria as well, which have a lot less competition. So if you have the ability to look outside the area, maybe spend a bit longer of a commute or even move to a smaller area, it may help you quite substantially, which is, as I said, how eventually I managed to secure a role was because of the remote area and lack of applicants in the area or lack of skill in the area. In Australia as well, we have so many good opportunities for free training and experience as well. So I did some training in an undergraduate certificate, which focused on cybersecurity. It was from a university. Again, it's something else that you can put on your CV, and it gives you a bit more experience and a bit more knowledge when you're talking to people, when you're taking interviews, when you're answering questions to somebody who may be a potential employer or potentially somebody who can refer you on. Being able to talk the talk can really be a big benefit. And even if you don't know the answers to the questions, if you've got something that can be relevant to the conversation, can definitely help you as well. So, yeah, for me, that was a big thing too, just being able to get that knowledge and experience from home labbing, from doing the training, and especially from podcasts, listening to a lot of the news about what was going on in cyber, understanding the threats that were out there, listening to people that have been in the industry for a very long time, and that have the advice for people that are trying to get out there. Because again, the people that are out there talking in podcasts or in these networks are generally going to have very good advice and are going to want to help more than anything. So, yeah, I'm worried I might be moving through this a bit quicker than what I'd anticipated with my talk. So hopefully we don't end up running too much further forwards anyway. But so from there, I'd spent about 2 years looking for my role. I'd started applying in about November, December 2021, and in about September 2023, I came across a job on it had only got 2 days left to apply for it. It wasn't a normal place that I would be looking for my roles. It was just in my email, and for some reason I opened it up with a couple of suggestions, and down the very bottom was a hospital in regional Victoria. And I'm like, yeah, that looks interesting. So I went through and I had a read through of the position description and everything like that. I'm like, it definitely sounds like something I want to do. So the location was about an hour and a half from where I live. I understood that there'd be a bit of a commute, but I really put a lot of effort into this. All of my applications, and another big thing is with your applications, make sure you tailor them to the role and the position description and what the organization's really wanting. Another part of focusing in what kind of area is making sure that you've got your CV to back that up to. So I would always spend maybe 10 minutes tailoring my CV and cover letter to particular applications, sometimes longer. In this, because I was getting so fed up and about to give up, um, I spent probably about 2 to 3 hours focusing on this application, um, going through understanding what the organization was about, reading about the board so I could understand what their motives are, um, reading through their kind of pillars and their expectations of their employees and everything like that, the job description, everything, and learning as much as I could about the organization before I went in and actually did the application. And I spent so much time making sure that the application fitted. And uh, it was very frustrating because they had very specific requirements of how long, what format the CV should be in, and the cover letter, and having to address certain things. I had to completely redo everything, but taking the time to understand it and to make sure it was very exactly what they wanted was a big thing that worked for me. Um, so I applied for that as it finished on a Sunday night, and at the next morning I called up and spoke to the hiring manager and explained to him who I was, introduced myself, and that I was trying to get into the industry and where I sat. And he was honest with me that they were looking for someone with a lot more experience, but they're happy to still talk about it. But I still didn't let that deter me because he was still talking to me. He didn't want to get me off the phone. I spoke to him for a little while about what kind of infrastructure they had, what the software they were using, what networking they were using, and then got an idea of what tools and software they were actually using so that I could go back. And once I got off the phone to him, I did more research into those so that if I did happen to get to the interview stage, I'd have an understanding of what they were talking about, where it gets used, um, and kind of some better use cases for that. And I was lucky enough that I did get an interview for it. And again, I was very honest about where I was. I'm very much a person that I don't want to deceive people about where I stand or what my skill levels are. And I was honest about what I did and didn't know. And they were very good with that as well. So um, when I was asked a question about something that I couldn't answer, have I had experience with this? What have I done with this? Um, I could always come back and say, well, no, I don't necessarily have experience with exactly what you're asking here. But in my home lab at home, I have been using this, which I feel can apply to that. The principles of this can apply to this. And I did that a lot in my drew a lot on my previous experience as well. So as I mentioned earlier, I worked as a private investigator, and report writing is a major component of that. So I was able to leverage when they asked me about, say, report writing to the board or doing up analysis of things. I said, well, I haven't done anything like that in particular. However, I have produced reports that went to lawyers. I have produced this and that. I understand that that's not exactly doing a report for a board or a risk assessment. However, I do believe that some of the logic from that can go to this. So that was a very good thing. And again, when posed questions, I may not have necessarily had the answer to something, but I could show the employer that although I can't answer that, although my answer is no, I do believe that I have strengths in this area, which will help me to benefit here. Again, that comes back to where having an understanding of the language used in security, what's happening in the current affairs, what's happened previously. If they mention something, I could say, well, I'm aware of this, and continue on that. So that was another thing that helped me very well. Now, when I did make the first phone call as well, I did also mention that my wife did work for this organization as well, which is not so much of a I think it's quite a large organization. It is the major employer in the area. 2.5 to 3,000 employees or users of their network regularly across 5 different sites. The main site where IT is based is a large campus. There's a 5-story tower on it, which houses a lot of the clinical stuff. Lots of different wings to it. It's quite a large thing. So it's not very much to note that my wife works there as well, but he didn't really ask much more about that until after I had the about a week before, after I'd been given the job and signed all the paperwork, and I was going to start the job. And my boss calls me up again, and he says, "All right, cool. So I just want you to not stress too much. We understand that you don't have the experience, so you're not really going to know what you're going to be doing when you walk in the door. You're not really going to know what to do. And again, we don't really know what we're going to do either, because they hadn't had a cybersecurity person before. They had no security program at all. Basically, all of their team had been trying to do their part in security, but nobody had ever been doing that. So he basically told me, don't worry, they're not expecting much out of me for my first 6 months. And he also mentioned, so you said your wife worked for the organization. Whereabouts does she work? And so she's a speech pathologist, so she works in allied health. So I'm like, oh, she works in allied health. I was like, oh, okay, they're in the same wing as us. I'm like, yes, they are actually. And he's like, okay, that's fine. And didn't ask much of a question about that again. However, on my first day, when I walked in the door with her, they noticed that her office is about 5 meters away from my office. So as large as the organization is, and I had a photo, but I couldn't get it into my slide. But yeah, so basically from standing from my office, you can see her door about 5 meters away from mine, which opens up again onto the IT manager's office. So out of the entire organization, it just happens to be right next to that as well. Didn't help me get the job, but it's definitely interesting. I now get to spend 3 hours a day, every day, in a car with my wife, for good or for bad. I get to spend a lot more time with my wife. I often get messages about making too much noise when I'm having a challenging task at work, and I'll often have to send her messages that she needs to stop clearing her throat so loudly. So when I got in, as I said, there was not really anybody who'd been in security before. There wasn't really much of a security program. They had controls set by the health department, which they tried to meet as best they could, but without anybody there managing it, they didn't really have an understanding of what they did and didn't have. We had no centralized logging. The antivirus was hit and miss where it had been installed. But what we did have was a good team from the network and infrastructure team, desktop support, and service desk. Everybody knew that security was a big important factor, and really wanted to help, even if they didn't know where they could. So the culture was a fantastic thing, and being able to communicate effectively. I'm not very good at communicating with people. Um, Social intelligence is something I've had to learn, and so I've tried very hard to integrate and learn the people that I'm working with. Um, so yeah, building a very good team within the infrastructure and networking has been very important because I don't have the skills and the knowledge to fix a lot of these things. I'm not going to be expected to help out with patching the network equipment because, to be honest, me touching that's probably going to break something, whereas we have people that are very experienced in doing that. But again, being able to communicate with them on a level to say, hey, this is what we've got, this is a risk. I'm not going to be here and just beat the drum about security vulnerabilities, but um, like we understand what the risks of these are. This is how we're mitigating it. I'm not there harassing them all the time about that. So, leaning on a lot of the things that I learned as a kid, dealing with what you've got. If anybody's heard the saying, everything looks like a nail when you have a hammer. I'm a bit the opposite. Um, if you've got a nail that you need to hammer in, everything's going to look like a hammer, whether it be a screwdriver or a piece of wood. You're going to use what you've got to hammer in that nail or to fix that laptop. So we being in public health, there's not a huge amount of funding that can go around without a lot of work towards it. But what we did have was a lot of service base, and I'm a big open source advocate, using a lot of different things throughout my life. So knowing that logs were a big thing from us, I went out and I did a deep dive into Wazza as a theme, um, rolling out a proof of concept using open source software that wasn't going to cost us much more except for some server processing, um, and implementing that proof of concept quite quickly and prove the worth of that. So again, leveraging what you know and you've had experience with in your life, being open source software, virtualizing stuff that I've used in my home lab, finding that the way I could use that. My ADHD, I also think is a superpower of mine. I can learn something very quickly and spend a deep dive hyper focusing for a week just looking at a single problem. So the antivirus that we had wasn't effectively rolled out throughout the organization. So I spent weeks just sitting there staring at the screen, learning every problem that we were facing to get that going. Um, so that was another thing that really benefited me, being able to sit there and just focus on that. And a number of projects like that, just being able to go out there and use what I've had experience with um, and push it out to the organization to try and make a good change. So where was I from here? So another thing that I found as well is that I'd always kind of been in the situation that I always thought that you could educate people and train people. And once you gave people the information, they're going to do the right thing. And I learned very quickly that that's not necessarily the case. You can equip people with all the information and the knowledge that you want, but they still don't necessarily take the best options. For example, I'd been there for about 2 weeks and I had a user that asked me about a piece of software. And I explicitly said, no, that looks like malware. Don't install that. It is really not a safe thing to do. And there will be problems if you do that. And about 20 minutes later, that user, who happened to be my wife, walks into my office and says, hey, Miles, I installed that piece of software and I can't stop it. And I thought she was joking. And I said, no, you're joking. And I went back to work and she's like, no, I really did. I can't stop it. I don't know what to do. And went and found that, yes, she was installing malware on the work computer and had to have that machine reimaged. So that was my first experience with that after 2 weeks. And a few weeks later, we had another user, which after we'd found that their mobile phone had been connecting to some bad servers, we removed them from the network, educated them as to what the problem was before we allowed their system to be, or their phone to be reconnected to the network. And they continued to connect to that server. And 3 times when we had educated them and showed them exactly what the problem was, they continued to manually reconnect their device back to the network. So some people ended up losing their Wi-Fi privileges. So yeah, there's a lot of learning to be taken from that, and challenging your own opinions. And again, challenging your opinions is another big important thing to do. I don't like alienating and attacking users for clicking on phishing links. I believe that we do need to educate and do some proper training, but I think that doing repeated, ongoing phishing training without any real learnings or proper educating of the users, just attacking them for when they click on something, is not helpful. But again, leveraging my network, when I was faced with a situation of ongoing phishing training that I have no impact on, I reached out to my network to get some good insights into why phishing training can work in an ongoing fashion, and really challenged my opinions um, for how to address that and how it can be a benefit. So yeah, as I said, I'm sorry that it's not as professional as some of the other talks out here, but I really hope that that somebody will take some information from here and use that in trying to find themselves a role. And yeah, thank you for coming to my ComfyCon talk.
I don't care that it was not professional. It was more professional than my talk. No, I think it was a really good talk that talks about the realities of getting a career in cyber, which I think are quite understood is what I'm trying to say.
100%.
In terms of like, what is it actually like to work in cyber? What are you actually getting thrown into to deal with?
Yeah,
so I think it was a great talk from that perspective.
Yeah, there was a big disconnect between what I'd been led to believe from different sources in the application market and the job market, because again, I think that different areas are easier. As I said, country area seemed to be very easy for me to get a role when it came up because there was not much talent, whereas in the city it was just impossible. As I said, 2 years and I didn't get a single interview. I'd always said that all I needed was one interview and I'd get the job. And I had even another piece of advice which I forgot to mention in there is that recruiters can be a great resource, but I think for people new getting in there, they're not necessarily going to be what gets you in. But at least the information and the connections that they might be able to give you, or the advice that they can give you, they've had a lot of experience with people in the industry and can probably also give you some good advice, but don't expect them to be the ones that are going to get you a job. And yeah, some advice that I'd been given from one is that I could probably sell myself if I got an interview, but he's not going to be able to get me that interview. But yeah, I took that with me the whole way, and I put a lot of effort into getting the interview, and once I had that, trying to take the opportunity from there.
Yeah, and look, you are obviously a great contributor to things like B-Sides Melbourne, and all those kind of things. Like, we see your face around, so it's definitely, I think, a great shower that networks are important, but like there's also a drive piece as well, like to be able to pull all that together and actually like apply it to yourself rather than just, oh, my network will do everything. Well, no, there's actually a piece where you have to drive yourself.
That's a big thing for me. I use my leverage. I use my networks for information, and for a lot of people, they'll probably be able to utilize the network to make those connections to get them a role, and that is a very important part of it. But my neurotype, my brain won't allow me to do that. I can't ask for that kind of help. So I relied on the information that they would have and the insights that I could get from my network to be able to use that, rather than actually going out there and saying, hey, I see your work is hiring, can you put me a reference? And that will be a very good use for a lot of people. But for me, that wasn't something I could rely on. I just can't ask for help in that way. It's very hard for me to do. So I just relied on the information and the advice I got from the network. And it's an amazing community. And I know that most people here are part of this community, but it is amazing, and it's really helped to change my life for the better. So thank you for everybody that I've met and everybody that's spoken to me, because it's made my life better, and that's why I really want to contribute more to the community, because everybody that I've met has given me some amazing advice, and I can think of at least half a dozen to a dozen people I've seen in here that are very important to me because you've helped me all.
I agree entirely. So thank you very much for presenting. It's been great to see you transition in and then to see you succeed. So thank you.
Thank you very much.